Have you ever stopped to consider that the greatest obstacle in your adult life may not be what happened yesterday, last week, or even over the past few years, but something that began long before you had the words to explain what you were feeling? What if the anxiety that appears for no apparent reason, the constant fear of rejection, the need to please everyone, the perfectionism that never feels good enough, or even that persistent sense of emptiness you can't quite explain are simply symptoms of a much older wound? Most people spend their entire lives trying to change their behaviors without realizing they're only trimming the branches while the roots remain untouched. Carl Jung believed that whatever remains unconscious continues to direct our lives, and the most unsettling part is that it happens without us even realizing it. We call it fate when, in many cases, it's nothing more than the quiet repetition of experiences that shaped our childhood. Perhaps, when you were very young, you learned that you had to be perfect in order to be loved. Perhaps you discovered that showing sadness was a sign of weakness, that expressing your needs made other people uncomfortable, or that you had to take care of everyone else to deserve affection. At the time, those strategies helped you survive emotionally. But today, they may be preventing you from truly living. That's why so many people change jobs, enter new relationships, move to different cities, begin therapy, read dozens of books on personal growth, and still keep encountering the same conflicts in different places. The scenery changes, but the pain remains. Not because you're weak, incapable, or destined to suffer, but because there's a part of your story that is still waiting to be seen. Throughout this video, you'll discover 3 essential steps to begin a genuine inner transformation. The first is learning to recognize the emotional wounds hidden beneath behaviors that seem completely normal but actually reveal unconscious patterns formed during childhood. You'll begin to realize that many of the fears you struggle with today didn't begin in adulthood, they simply found new ways to express themselves. The second step is learning to embrace that part of yourself without guilt, without judgment, and without feeling the need to erase your past. Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This means turning toward the parts of yourself you've avoided for years, not to relive the pain, but to finally understand what has been trying to get your attention all along. And the third step is learning how to integrate those experiences into your identity, so you stop living as someone who merely reacts to old wounds and begin living as someone who makes conscious choices. This is the path Jung called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are instead of continuing to play the roles you created simply to survive. But there's one crucial detail that almost no one talks about. The greatest mistake isn't that you were wounded. The greatest mistake is believing those wounds disappeared simply because time has passed. The unconscious doesn't experience time the way the conscious mind does. Whatever has never been fully processed continues to influence your decisions, your relationships, and even the way you see yourself. And this is exactly where most people become confused. They believe the problem lies in the life they're living today, when in reality, its true origin may be hidden far deeper than they could ever imagine. This introduction was designed to create immediate identification, establish authority through Carl Jung's ideas, present a clear 3-step promise, and naturally lead the viewer into the next section without resolving the narrative tension. Before we continue, I'd like to make a heartfelt invitation. If the beginning of this video has already helped you recognize something in your own life story, take a moment to leave a like. That simple gesture helps YouTube share this video with other people who may be living through the very same pain but still haven't found the words, or the explanation, for what they're experiencing. I'd also love to hear from you. Leave a comment saying, "I want to break free." Or, if you feel comfortable, share which of these emotional wounds has had the greatest impact on your life: the fear of rejection, the need to please others, the feeling of never being enough, or any other wound you've recognized in yourself so far. Sometimes, simply realizing that we're not alone is the very first step toward healing. And if you're interested in practical psychology, self-discovery, personal growth, and Carl Jung's profound insights for building a more conscious and balanced life, be sure to subscribe to the channel. With every new video, you'll gain access to reflections and practical tools that can transform the way you understand yourself and your relationships. Because the journey we're beginning today isn't just about understanding the past, it's about reclaiming the freedom to build a future that is no longer ruled by the wounds of childhood. And to do that, we first need to understand how those wounds can remain hidden for so many years, quietly influencing every decision we make. Perhaps the most important question you can ask yourself right now isn't, "What's wrong with me?" but rather, "When did I begin believing there was something wrong with me?" There is a profound difference between those two questions. The first leads you to search for flaws in the person you are today, while the second invites you to explore the story that shaped the way you see yourself. And that is precisely where so many emotional wounds remain hidden for years. They don't show up as vivid childhood memories. Instead, they disguise themselves as behaviors that seem like natural parts of your personality. You tell yourself you're simply hard on yourself, when perhaps you learned that you would only be loved if you were perfect. You believe you were born anxious, when you may have grown up in an environment where you never truly felt safe. You think you're naturally independent, but perhaps you simply learned far too early that you couldn't rely on anyone else. The problem is that when we live with pain for long enough, it stops feeling like pain and starts feeling like who we are. Carl Jung once said that what we fail to confront within ourselves eventually appears in our lives as fate. That idea becomes even more powerful when we realize that many of the choices we make as adults are not driven by our conscious selves, but by the emotional needs of the child who was once trying to survive. That's why some people spend their lives searching for approval without ever feeling good enough. Others repeatedly find themselves in relationships where they have to beg for love. Some work themselves to exhaustion because resting awakens an unexplainable sense of guilt. And there are those who are so afraid of making mistakes that they choose not to try at all. In every one of these situations, the real question isn't, "Why do I act this way?" but rather, "What is this part of me trying to protect?" Analytical psychology teaches us that the unconscious holds far more than memories. It preserves emotions that never had the chance to be fully felt. Those emotions continue shaping our thoughts, decisions, and relationships even when we believe we've left the past behind. The more we try to ignore them, the more they search for other ways to get our attention. They reveal themselves through anxiety, emptiness, self-sabotage, and even that difficult-to-explain feeling that something is missing, despite the fact that everything seems fine on the surface. Jung also said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Perhaps, for the first time, you're beginning to realize that what you've always called your personality may actually be a survival strategy you developed many years ago. And that realization has the power to completely transform the way you begin to see yourself. If any of these words describe something you've been feeling, leave a comment saying, "I'm beginning to understand." That small gesture could mark the beginning of a transformation far greater than you can imagine. Now a question arises that often makes people uncomfortable, yet has the power to completely change the way you see your own story. If these wounds are still influencing your life, why haven't they simply disappeared with time? After all, we've been told since childhood that time heals everything. Perhaps you've even repeated that to yourself, believing that all you had to do was move on, keep yourself busy, or pretend everything was fine. But the truth is that time alone doesn't heal what remains hidden in the unconscious. It only teaches us how to live with the pain. And there's a profound difference between no longer consciously feeling something and truly healing an emotional wound. This is exactly where most people lose their way. They mistake forgetting for healing, when in reality, forgetting can simply be another way of running from what still needs to be faced. Carl Jung understood something extraordinary about the human mind: everything we reject within ourselves continues searching for a way to be acknowledged. Not because it wants to punish us, but because it longs to be integrated. The harder we try to push certain emotions away, the more unexpected ways they find to express themselves. They show up as an irrational fear of being abandoned, difficulty trusting even those who genuinely love us, a constant need for approval, or a sense of emptiness that no achievement can ever fill. The problem was never that you feel these emotions. The real problem is spending years believing they define who you are. Take a moment to think about the situations that trigger your strongest emotional reactions. Perhaps a simple criticism feels like a devastating personal attack. Maybe an unanswered text message fills you with overwhelming anxiety. Or perhaps a minor disagreement makes you feel as though you're about to be rejected or abandoned. Most people believe these reactions are caused by what's happening in the present. But more often than not, the present has simply touched an emotional memory from long ago. The trigger exists in the present, but the source almost always lies in the past. And as long as that source remains unconscious, you'll keep trying to solve today's problems with survival strategies created by a child who simply wanted to feel safe. Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This isn't about staying trapped in suffering. It's about having the courage to face what has remained hidden for so many years. Because what is brought into the light loses much of its power. What is embraced no longer silently controls your choices. Perhaps you're beginning to realize that you were never weak because you felt things so deeply. Perhaps you were simply a child who had to learn how to survive before ever having the chance to learn how to truly live. If this reflection resonated with you, leave the word awareness in the comments. Sometimes a single word represents the decision to stop running from yourself. And it is at that very moment that we begin to understand why some wounds remain invisible for so many years, hidden behind a part of the personality that Carl Jung gave a remarkably revealing name. This is exactly where Carl Jung introduces one of the most transformative concepts in analytical psychology, the persona and the shadow. At first, these terms may sound complex, but the experience they describe is something almost everyone has lived through. From a very early age, we learn that some parts of ourselves are accepted, while others seem to invite rejection. A child who is constantly criticized for crying may come to believe that showing emotions is dangerous. Another child, praised only for getting good grades, may grow up believing that their worth depends entirely on their achievements. Little by little, without even realizing it, we begin creating a version of ourselves that seems more acceptable to the world. This is the persona, the psychological mask we wear in order to be loved, accepted, recognized, or simply to avoid being hurt again. The problem is that every mask comes at a price. Whenever we hide an emotion, a fear, or a personal need in order to maintain that image, an authentic part of who we are is pushed into the unconscious. Jung called this collection of rejected aspects the shadow. And it isn't made up only of the qualities we consider negative. The shadow may also contain the spontaneity you stopped expressing, the creativity that was ridiculed, the courage that never had the chance to grow, and even the ability to say no without feeling guilty. In other words, many of the qualities that seem to be missing from your life today may never have disappeared at all. They were simply buried beneath layers of emotional protection you developed during childhood. That's why so many people say they no longer know who they truly are. They have spent so many years trying to meet the expectations of their families, their schools, their relationships, and society that they've lost touch with their own essence. They stay busy, productive, and responsible, yet carry a quiet sense of emptiness within them. It's as though they're playing a role every moment of their lives. And the longer they keep performing that role, the harder it becomes to hear the voice of their inner child, the part of them that still longs to be seen, embraced, and loved without having to earn it. The healing of emotional wounds begins the moment we realize that we no longer have to keep supporting an identity that was created simply to survive. Jung wrote that, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." It sounds like a simple statement, but it carries a profound question. Who would you be if you no longer had to live according to other people's expectations? What choices would you make? Which relationships would you keep? What would you finally stop feeling guilty about? These questions aren't meant to produce immediate answers. They're meant to open a door that may have remained closed for many years. Because every journey of self-discovery begins the moment we find the courage to question what we've always believed was our personality. If this reflection awakened something within you, leave a comment saying, "I choose to become whole." Sometimes a life-changing decision begins with just a few words. And the discoveries ahead may reveal that what you've always called a flaw is actually a forgotten part of your story waiting to be integrated. After realizing that many of your reactions began as survival strategies and that the persona may be hiding an essential part of who you truly are, a question naturally arises, the one that changes everything: how does healing actually begin? The answer often comes as a surprise, because it isn't about erasing the past or pretending it never happened. True transformation begins when you stop fighting your story and start listening to it. This is the point where many people give up, because they were taught to believe that feeling deeply is a sign of weakness. They learn to hold back their tears, hide their fears, and keep moving forward as if nothing had ever happened. But what is repressed never truly disappears. It simply waits for the right moment to resurface, often in the form of anxiety, emotional breakdowns, difficult relationships, or a persistent feeling that something is missing, even when life seems to be going well. Carl Jung understood that healing doesn't come from denying pain, but from integrating what has been rejected. In other words, the inner child who still lives within you isn't asking to return to the past. That child is asking to finally be heard. Imagine a child trying to get an adult's attention for years. The more that child is ignored, the louder they have to cry out. Emotional wounds work in exactly the same way. Every trigger, every overwhelming fear, every impulsive reaction can be understood as an attempt by that forgotten part of you to say, "Look at me. I'm still here." And perhaps, for the first time, you'll begin to see these signals not as flaws in your personality, but as meaningful messages from your unconscious. That is precisely why self-awareness is so powerful. The moment you recognize an emotional pattern, it no longer has complete control over you. The moment you identify a trigger, you gain the freedom to respond differently. And the moment you embrace your own vulnerability, you interrupt a cycle that may have been passed down through generations of your family. Jung believed that no one becomes whole by rejecting parts of themselves. Becoming whole means accepting that both light and shadow exist within every one of us. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is the willingness to face that fear without allowing it to continue quietly directing your life. This is the true path of individuation, the process of reclaiming the parts of your soul that were left behind in the past and bringing them into the present with awareness, compassion, and responsibility. Perhaps you're beginning to realize that healing childhood wounds has never been about forgetting, it has always been about integration. If this idea resonated with you, leave a comment saying, "I choose to embrace my story." Sometimes acknowledging that decision to yourself is the very first step toward profound transformation. But there is one aspect of this journey that very few people understand, and it explains why certain signs reveal that healing has truly begun, even before you fully realize how much you've changed. There comes a point when transformation stops being just an idea and begins to reveal itself in the small choices you make every day. What's most fascinating is that these signs are rarely dramatic. They appear quietly, as if a part of you is finally taking its first deep breath after spending years living in survival mode. You notice that you no longer feel the same need to please everyone. You discover that you can say no without carrying the crushing weight of guilt. A criticism no longer shatters your self-esteem. A disagreement no longer feels like the end of a relationship. Little by little, you begin responding to life as the adult you've become, rather than as the child who once had to survive. This is one of the clearest signs that your emotional wounds are no longer driving your decisions. Carl Jung believed that the purpose of life was not to achieve perfection, but to become whole. That distinction changes everything. For a long time, you may have believed that healing meant never feeling fear, sadness, or insecurity again. But analytical psychology points to a very different path. Healing childhood wounds doesn't mean eliminating pain altogether, it means no longer allowing that pain to govern your identity. You may still feel afraid, but fear will no longer make your decisions for you. You may still experience rejection, but it will no longer determine your worth. You will still face challenges, but you won't face them believing you're never enough. This transformation happens because self-awareness changes your relationship with your emotions, allowing them to stop being your enemies and instead become guides that help you better understand who you truly are. There is another important sign that very few people recognize. As individuation begins to unfold, you stop spending so much energy trying to control other people's behavior and begin investing that energy in the only thing you can truly transform, your own consciousness. You compare yourself to others less often. The constant need for approval begins to fade. Anxiety no longer dominates every thought. And little by little, something increasingly rare in today's world begins to emerge: inner peace. Not permanent happiness, because that would be an illusion, but a deep emotional stability built upon genuine self-knowledge. Jung once said, "Who looks outside, dreams; who looks inside, awakes." Perhaps that awakening is exactly what is beginning within you right now. If this message resonated with your heart, leave a comment saying, "I choose to awaken." Someone reading those words may realize, for the very first time, that they are not alone on this journey of self-discovery and emotional healing. If you've made it this far, perhaps it wasn't by chance. Maybe some part of your own story recognized itself in every reflection, every idea, and every insight we shared today. And if that's true, I want you to remember one thing: your emotional wounds do not define who you are. They are part of your story, but they don't have to determine your future. The path of self-discovery isn't always easy, but it's on that path that we begin to reclaim our freedom, our inner peace, and the courage to live more authentically. As Carl Jung taught us, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. If this message reflects what you've been feeling or helped you see something new about yourself, leave a comment saying, "Today I choose myself." Or, if you prefer, share the part of this video that touched your heart the most. Your words may inspire someone who is quietly fighting the very same battle. And if this video brought value to your life, please leave a like. That simple gesture helps YouTube recommend this video to other people who also need to understand their emotional wounds, deepen their self-awareness, and begin their own journey of inner transformation. Share this video with someone you love who may still be carrying childhood wounds without realizing how deeply they continue to shape their adult life. Sometimes a single message can be the beginning of a life-changing transformation. If you feel this channel speaks directly to you, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week, you'll find new videos inspired by Carl Jung's depth psychology, personal growth, and practical tools to help you strengthen your mind, better understand your emotions, and build a more conscious, balanced life, free from the unconscious patterns that limit your true potential. And don't stop here. In the next video, we'll take this journey even deeper by exploring how to recognize the unconscious patterns that keep you repeating the same relationships, the same fears, and the same conflicts, even when you believe you've already changed. I'm confident that after everything you've discovered today, this next reflection will resonate with you even more. Click on the video that's now appearing on your screen and continue your journey of transformation.